topic, the Bible and LGBTQ plus. The Bible and LGBTQ plus. And we will tell you, you learn more about what LGBTQ plus means. I think most of you know that. And I think that knowledge has propelled you to the platform tonight, has kind of caused you to be a little curiouser than you usually are. And so we kick off our discussion tonight by introducing our panelists, again, for those who have recently joined us. Dr. Fazaduddin Hussain, personal mentor and friend, the Dean of Theology at the University of the Southern Caribbean, and also the coordinator of the one of the coordinators of the doctoral program offered between the USC and NCU in coordination with the Inter-American Theological Seminary. That's as much as I know. Also, Dr. Roy Gain, who is an accomplished author and authority on many issues within Adventism, of course, hails all the way from Australia. And when we think of Australia, we think of guys like Brett Lee and Shane Warren and Glenn McGrath, you know, guys who have been nemesis to the West Indies players over the years. But welcome, Dr. Gain. And we are looking forward to hearing from you tonight. And also we want to welcome our third panelist, Dr. Dilly Brooks. And she told you all the places she's from, but I only remember Jamaica. And so we want to welcome Dr. Brooks, and thank you for joining us tonight. And again, we look forward to hearing from you. So at this time, we will move right into our discussion. Is there anything, Pastor Lowe, that we must take into consideration before we kick off?
I think we're good, Elder. I am trying to see if I could accommodate those who are begging us to have an alternate stream on YouTube. So we're working on that meanwhile.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Right. So each panelist will give an overview for 10 minutes on the issue of LGBTQ. Dr. Gain from the Old Testament perspective, and Dr. Faz from the New Testament theological perspective. So we move right in at this time, and we invite Dr. Roy Gain, Professor of Hebrew Bible and Ancient Near Eastern Languages at the Southern Adventist Theological Seminary. Is that it, correct, Dr. Gain? Seventh Adventist Theological
Seminary, Andrews University.
Right. So thank you very much, Doc. And the floor is now yours to talk with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I love the Caribbean. I've spent some vacation time there. And also in 1996, I taught a couple of classes at what then was West Indies College. Now it's Northern Caribbean University in Jamaica. Just loved Jamaica. Had a wonderful time. Took my family. What I'm going to show you, and I'm going to start sharing my screen, is a PowerPoint. We're going to go through some things rather quickly. And this is from a longer presentation that I did this summer at pastors' conferences for the Inter-European Division in Cologne, France, and in Friedensau in Germany. Now, I don't know if you heard, but in Germany, they've had quite a stir because there was a pastor in Hamburg, Germany, who came out as bisexual. And so this is a really hot topic in the Inter-European Division. So they invited me to speak twice. And this is a much longer presentation than I have to give you in 10 minutes, but I'll give you some of the highlights of what I was asked to do, and that is the biblical view of sexuality and homosexuality. So my topic is LGBTQ plus and the Bible. And I did go through some terms and definitions. I'm not going to do that with you now. I'm showing you that I have this in case during the question and answer time anyone wants to raise these issues. Terms and definitions. What does LGBTQ plus mean? And so on. And then the Kinsey scale, a scale from exclusively heterosexual to exclusively homosexual, and then in between. It's not just one or the other. There is a gradation of different types of sexuality. Now let's get to biblical sexuality. And here I'm going to open up. And biblical sexuality really begins in Genesis. And there you have male and female. And in the Bible, you only have male and female birth sex. That's it. There is nothing else in the Bible than that. No intersex, although this is now a reality. Only heterosexual activity is permitted, and only within marriage in the Bible. It rules out explicitly homosexual activity. We're going to look at some passages that do that. There's silence on the possibility of lesbian, gay, bisexual orientations or transgender identity, etc. That is to say, it's not a matter of orientation. That's sort of irrelevant. What matters is what you do. Okay, so the Bible rules out homosexual activity, but it is not saying that if a person is naturally inclined to be attracted to the same gender, that's a sin in and of itself. Just as it's not a sin for one of us who is heterosexual to be naturally attracted to people of the opposite gender who are not married to us. That is, by the way, the Seventh-day Adventist position at the Conference on Sexuality in Cape Town a number of years ago. That was one of the first statements that President Ted Wilson said. It is not a sin to be homosexual in terms of orientation. The issue is what you do. Biblical sexuality. What matters is not one's sexual orientation or gender identity, but whether one is faithful to divinely revealed standards of sexual purity. One can be LGBTQ+ in terms of orientation or identity and not sin if one does not cherish or act on desires that the Bible defines as sinful. And of course, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount that it's a sin to lust after a person. And so that would apply here too. You know, just as it would be a sin for heterosexual to lust at someone of the opposite gender whom they're not married to, so it would be a sin for a person attracted to someone of the same gender to lust after someone of the same gender in that case. The purpose of God's law overall is important to consider. Now, Israel, what does the Lord require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes. And this next bit is very crucial, which I command you today for your good. Okay, so God's laws are not arbitrary. It's not to make him feel good. God's laws are to help us for the way he has made us. He created us. The Bible is the manufacturer's handbook. Just as we have a manufacturer's handbook for the vehicles that we drive, the Bible is the manufacturer's handbook because he created us. He knows what is good for us. What is our attitude to God's law? Well, there is a popular modern attitude that goes like this. I should have the right to identify myself, express myself, and act according to who I feel I am. If there is a God who is my maker, he's responsible for who I am, so don't blame me if I act accordingly. And there are people who say this very explicitly, very publicly. This false theodicy overlooks the fall into sin. So it's a theodicy, which means justification of the character of God. All right. That is to say, God is right in what he does if he lets me do what he made me be. But this overlooks the fact that we are all in a fallen state. We're in an imperfect environment. We're imperfect people. And therefore, we can't say that the way we are is the way God made us originally. It's not. There was an ideal that God created, and we have fallen into something other than that ideal. So if he does not allow us to act according to our natural tendencies, then that is part of his redemption plan for us. Now, here is a page from the Time magazine about a British actor. And notice what I've highlighted in yellow in the third column from the left. Do you still rip Leviticus 18 out of hotel Bibles? He says, yes. And I have people who send me the page tied together saying, if you want to hang that up in the smallest room in the house, that'll do. The smallest room in the house, you know what that is. That's the bathroom. So they're making fun of the Bible, and they're completely disrespecting and disregarding God's law. This is a very common view. If it gets in the way with their lifestyle, their identity, then the Bible has to go. Okay, so attitudes to God's law. Do we ignore God's law? Do we rebel against it? Do we try to change it? Do we replace God's law with human political correctness? Do we accept God's law, on the other hand, acknowledge human failure, and accept God's pardon and transformation? Now let's talk about homosexual activity. Very clear, isn't it? You can see that. This is Leviticus 18, verse 22. And it's very clear language. And this is Leviticus 20, verse 13. Ve'isha sher yishkavet zachar mishkave isha toeva asu shnehem mot yumatu damehem bam. Okay, let's translate those. Leviticus 18:22. You will not have sexual activity with a male like sexual activity with a woman. It is an offensive thing. Leviticus 20, verse 13. If there's a man who has sexual intercourse with a male like sexual intercourse with a woman, both of them have committed an offensive thing. They will indeed be put to death. Their blood guilt is on them. And that's my translation from the Hebrew. Okay, both of these verses refer to male homosexual activity as literally to lie a male, the lyings down of a woman. That's the literal Hebrew. To lie a male, the lyings down of a woman. Lie covers going to bed and having sex, including foreplay, penetration, and ejaculation. Okay, we're an adult group here, right? So I'm going to be rather explicit. Don't have much choice with this topic here. Just if the text were just speaking of penetration, as some scholars have said, they've said that the only thing that's wrong is penetration, but other forms of homosexual activity are okay. No, simply penetration, if the Hebrew wanted to say that, we know what that is because this expression is used elsewhere. It is the verb natan, which means to put or give, plus the noun shakovet, which means penis, plus preposition bet, so literally put one's penis in. Okay, none of the translations translate that, all right? They're all euphemisms. They're beating around, they're talking around it. They don't want to say exactly what it explicitly says, but this is what the Hebrew says. Okay, so the lyings down of a woman is what a man would experience having sex with a woman, just as the lying down of a male is the sexual experience of a woman with a man in other verses. So Leviticus 18 and 20 forbid a male to have sexual experience with another male that he would otherwise have with a woman. Lesbian sex is implicitly forbidden in this sense, and it's explicitly forbidden in Romans 1:26, which refers to women having unnatural relations with each other. Okay, there's no culturally dependent elements here. It's simple, clear, unambiguous language. It's in the context of moral laws, so it's timeless, divine identification of homosexual acts as moral failure, which is sin. The rest of the Bible consistently condemns homosexual activity, and these are verses that do that. No biblical allowance for homosexual activity in committed exclusive partnership. Some people, including some Seventh-day Adventists, have tried to argue that it's okay if it is in a committed exclusive, that is monogamous relationship. No, all homosexual activity is forbidden according to the Bible. Homosexual holy matrimony is an oxymoron. There's nothing holy about it. It, in fact, is a toeva, which is an offensive thing to God. It's often translated abomination. This doesn't mean that a person who has orientation, they have attraction to a person of the same gender, that person is an abomination. What is an abomination is the act. Limited to homosexual activity, it doesn't condemn a person with homosexual tendencies who chooses not to act on them. So there would be no problem with having, say, an Adventist pastor or leader, denominational leader, who is homosexual in terms of orientation, who, by the grace of God, has committed to be sexually pure and to live that way. That, in fact, is quite heroic because it's very difficult these days with the media, society, and laws all saying it's okay, go ahead and do it. Temptation is not sin, although lust is sin. There are other serious sins. It's not the only serious sin. There's other ones, including spiritual pride and many other serious sins, adultery, and so on and so forth. This isn't the only one. There was a penalty under the Israelite theocracy, which is capital punishment, as Leviticus 20 says, but this does not apply to now. There are basic human rights of everyone in a non-theocratic state that should be protected. We should be advocating the human rights, the basic human rights of everyone in our society, even if we don't agree with their lifestyle, just as we protect the rights of other people who smoke, drink, and do all kinds of other things, or maybe commit adultery and all those things. They have a right to be people, and they're people for whom Christ died. We want to minister to them. We want them to come to salvation, but we should stand up for their basic rights of not being ridiculed or attacked or anything like that, harassed. Okay, now this is another section, and I don't think I have time for this. Attempts to avoid condemnation of homosexual activity. I'm going to get out of that, and I think I'm out of time. So I'll just show you what I have in the rest of the PowerPoint, and then during the question and answer period, we may want to come back to it. There are a number of different ways that people have tried to interpret the Bible in order to avoid biblical condemnation of homosexual activity. I've got a number of those here and answers to them, and they all fail. Then I have a section on treatment of active homosexuals. How should we treat these people in the church in a redemptive way and in the spirit of Christ? So this is very, very important. We need to have both and then there is hope for sexual purity by the grace of God. There is accessible obedience. God makes obedience accessible so that apart from him, we can do nothing, but with him, we can do all things through him who strengthens him. And then here is a book on homosexuality, marriage, and the church, biblical counseling and religious liberty issues, produced here by Andrews University Press, edited by myself, Nicholas Miller, and Peter Swanson. This is a very, very valuable resource that was based on papers from a conference that we had here at Andrews University. And then a list of publications by myself. So I'm going to leave it there because I'm out of time, but I just went through that so you would know what is here in case there are any questions. We want to go back to those. Let me just say this one thing, and that is, for me, the model is Christ. Jesus is incredible. And when I meditate on his life, I see that here is Jesus, whose purity was so great that it condemned that of the most self-righteous people in the country. And yet, he drew sinners who felt comfortable with him. And then, even though they knew that he had a transforming effect on them, how could he both be so pure and yet attract people to himself? And the answer is pure love of God. That's the answer. And that is what we need in dealing with this issue. It's extraordinarily difficult, very, very hard for people. I have relatives, I have friends who are homosexual and so on. And it's a real cross to bear. It's very, very difficult. And I've talked with people who have prayed for years. They've wanted to get out of this. They've wanted to be heterosexual. God hasn't given them that gift. So they're living a life of sexual purity. In other cases, some people have been able to have attraction for the opposite gender, have married and have children and so on, and they're living happily ever after. So it just depends on the situation. And but the key is sexual purity, whatever the case.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Pastor Edwards, if you just give me a moment, let me just do some home maintenance quickly. All right, so we're going to do our best here, regardless of our conviction or our views, to be respectful to each other. There was an offensive comment posted within the comment list. I do apologize to the general body for that. That person has been removed. And please, if you put comments like that up that are offensive, that are rude, that are vulgar, or that misrepresent the character of God, we have no choice but to delete and remove you from the attendee list. All right, so let's please be professional, spiritual, and respectful and loving towards each other. Thank you so much, Dr. Gain. Pastor Edwards is going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And we want to restate the importance of being, as I said, respectful. As it applies to life, it applies to the virtual platform. So let's try to live with that as much as possible. All right, so we will take Dr. Fazl this time on in his perspective on the New Testament and LGBTQ.
Yes, Dr. Faz, 1 second.
Okay.
All right, there you go.
Thank you. May I have the privilege to share my screen? Thank you.
You should. Your
Okay,
co-host
okay.
should be able to. Is it giving? Okay, there you go.
So I have it there now.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Please.
We are.
Yes,
Forgive me, tonight is the Sabbath. I've tried to find some very appropriate pictures for you. Don't be misled, but we are making a point here tonight, biblically speaking. So I've been asked to give this topic on homosexuality in the New Testament times, and in view of the brevity of time, I shall cut the chase and plunge straight into my discourse. Again, like Dr. Gain, I'm going to share quickly some slides, and you can have this accessible after the presentation. And I want to get straight into what Paul says about homosexuality. That's the meat of the matter. But to give a little background and to give a historical perspective, so you can better put in perspective what Paul is saying in the New Testament, I shall give you a quick aerial overview of what homosexuality was like among the Greeks, especially in the time of Jesus in the Hellenistic period. Homosexuality actually was rampant by the 6th century BC. There are allusions to homosexuality in Homer's writings, but it can even go way back to 1400 BC. By the time of the Spartans, the male warrior class, they sparked this kind of behavior. A name commonly known in Greek antiquity connected to homosexual activity was Sappho, from the island of Lesbos, a word from which we derived the term lesbian. She operated a school for girls that honored Aphrodite and the Muses, different pantheon of gods from Zeus. She wrote a number of poems expressing her feelings for girls, including brides on their wedding day. The most common form of homosexuality among the Greek males was pederasty. The term referred to a system of education for boys in which they were placed by their fathers under the care of another man to be trained. The boy was called the eromenos, that's the Greek word, and could provide sexual favors for his mentor. This was Greek culture. And the Erastes, Plutarch traces the practice to the Persians. In Athens, where Paul preached, this was an acceptable practice. In Corinth was notorious for female prostitutes, but Athens, homosexuality, pederasty. An adult male, now listen to this very carefully, because these are some of the arguments that the homosexuals use. The adult male could have a relationship with a boy until he reaches puberty. The boy was not supposed to enjoy the experience, but merely to enjoy it out of respect for the Erastes. If the boy sought pleasure from the experience, he would be considered a pornos, a prostitute, or a pervert. And so the intent of the Erastes was to kindle a kind of admiration and gratitude on the part of the boy. He in turn will do favors for the boy. In public, though, both will behave with decorous and circumspect. It was a type of silent, mutual relationship in the pedagogic interest of the boy, where he learned to develop his masculinity. In the gymnasium, adolescent males would exercise in the nude, and the older men would peep them. There were many peeping toms in those days, and sometimes seduce them. Later, during the Hellenistic period, we are told of someone called, and Dr. Gain will know this term, the hetaira, and who dressed up as a boy to attract the young males in the gymnasium. And Plato records this kind of relationship as a love of the soul and not that of the senses. And so we had people like Lucian of Samosata, a Roman satirist. He considered pederasty to be bred into people from childhood and enacted by divine laws. He argues that marriage is necessary for the perpetuity of the race. That is why boy love did not appear in earlier times. But with leisure came the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge, and men have found boy love to be the stablest of loves. Now, he's a satirist. Some argue, now watch this here now, the love of men for boys was never quite sanctioned by society. Consequently, parents united in their efforts to check and control through the appointment of a pedagogos. And that's in the book of Galatians, the school teacher, the analogy of the law. The law was like, the ceremonial was like a schoolmaster that brought the child, you know, the pedagogos. Some are saying that they decided to appoint these pedagogi, plural, as guardians or custodians who will protect the boy against the homosexuals. You know, these erastes. And so that's important for us to understand. I move on quickly. I'm going to cross the androgynous myth and go to the reaction of Hellenistic Judaism. Now, Palestinian Judaism consistently rejected homosexuality, as indicated by Dr. Gain. From the legal injunctions in the Torah, also the Targums, the translations of the Torah, the Neophyte text and the Targum Jonathan, in the interpretation of Genesis 19, they forbid homosexual rape, and Deuteronomy 23:19 as male homosexual. I'm moving quickly here now. The Mishnah, which is a 2nd century document that was finally redacted by Judah Hanassi along Pharisaical lines, the Mishnah says that homosexuality was punishable by death, and it is classified as a Gentile sin. So Jews were not under much suspicion of it, although certain precautions were made to avoid temptation or the appearance of it. We come to the Jewish diaspora now. Septuagint in the LXX, again made reference to that text in Leviticus 18:22, and the actual translation is in the Greek: with a male arson you shall not lie the intercourse, koite, literally bed, of a woman. And whosoever lies with a male, the intercourse, koite of woman, both have done an abomination, they shall be put to death. They are guilty, Leviticus 20. In 1 Corinthians 6:9, the Apostle Paul uses the word arsenokoites, an almost exact parallel in the Hebrew. We'll go a little deeper into that shortly. I just want to rush on quickly. Philo, Josephus, all of these guys, I'm rushing on quickly here. Apocryphal and pseudepigraphal writings, they all condemn homosexuality. A theological aside here about the ordering of nature. They talk about in the book of Wisdom, a pseudepigraphal writing of the Jews, they say that it has to do with the changing of the order of nature, a disordering of nature. And so as a theological aside, for Adventists, the Sabbath is always considered in the context of the order of creation. Homosexuality seems to follow a disordering of the nature. So you may want to work out that underlying assumption. Now I move quickly to my final thing here, which is Paul and homosexuality. I hope I'll have enough time to get to Jesus. But there are 3 main passages that are significant for our discussion today. This is my translation from the Greek, and I want to go through this quickly so you'll get an aerial understanding of what we are talking about. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Their women exchange natural relations for what is contrary to nature, and men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a base mind and improper conduct. Now, these verses are followed immediately by the longest vice list in the New Testament. Romans 1:26 to 29 to 32. Verses 26 and 27 are crucial texts in the contemporary debate about homosexuality. Conservative traditionalists hold that this text is explicit in its condemnation of homosexual behavior. I want to interface here now with the gay lobbyists. The gay lobbyists, they beg to differ. Three arguments are advanced. The first is they say that the passage is irrelevant. Its purpose is neither to teach sexual ethics nor expose vice, but rather to portray the workings of God's wrath. And this is Faz's response. You see, while this is true in the context of the theme of Romans 1, if a certain sexual misconduct is seen as a consequence of God's wrath, it must be displeasing to him and therefore wrong. Second argument they have is that the likelihood that Paul is only thinking about pederasty. Remember, that was the major common Greek practice of homosexuality. Since they say there was no other form of male homosexuality in the Greco-Roman world, and that he is opposing it because of the humiliation and exploitation by the youths involved. Here is my response. The text itself contains no hint of this category of sin. It simply says men with men. You don't have to go to high school to understand that, albeit below the school. And so the question they also argue is that, what does Paul mean by nature? Some homosexuals argue that their relationships are not unnatural, since their behavior is perfectly natural to them. Some go so far to say that Paul is not condemning homosexuals per se, but homosexual acts committed by apparently heterosexual people. So you hear the argument. This is something against nature, because they were born as heterosexuals, but now they want to transfer now to homosexual behavior, and so Paul is condemning that as being unnatural. Thus, Paul could say they abandon natural relations and exchange them for the unnatural. Now, here is my response to that. My response to that is warrants a little exegesis on the part of the text, like Dr. Gain will do with the Hebrew, I will do with the Greek. And so there is a contrasting pair. Yeah. All right. Now we come back to this. It has two Greek words there. Taphusin in that's the first word on your left, which means natural, and paraphusin, which means unnatural. It was frequently used in antiquity as a way of distinguishing between heterosexual and homosexual behavior. I found that in Plato, Laws 1:636, section 886 to 841. To live according to nature, says Musonius Rufus, a contemporary of the Apostle Paul, a Roman Socrates, says to live according to virtue is to live according to nature. And among the Stoics, marriage was always said to be kataphusin, not paraphusin, was always natural. The difference between sexual orientation and sexual practice is a modern concept. It is anachronistic to suggest that Paul intends to condemn homosexual acts only when they are committed by persons who are constitutionally heterosexual. This distinction is totally foreign to Paul's thought world. So then, we have no liberty to interpret the noun nature to mean my nature, or the adjective natural to mean what is natural to me, On the contrary, natural means God's created order. To act against nature, therefore, is to violate order which God has established, whereas to according to nature, the first one is kata fusin, the second one, according to nature, kata with the genitive, with the accusative, sorry, according to nature, to behave in according with the intention of, yes, the creator. So what is the intention of the creator, my dear believers in Christ? His original intention, that is, in the beginning, God created ye them, male and female. This carried with it patriarchal understanding of sex roles. For this reason, what should a man do? He should become one flesh, yes, leave his father and mother. What God has joined together, let no man asunder. So in other words, God's created humankind, male, female, according to his providential ordering. God instituted marriage as a heterosexual union, and what have you, and what have you. Okay, so now quickly, I know how many more? I have 1 more minute. Can I do this one quickly? This has a very important thing I discovered here. I'll forego the translation, but watch in the middle of this verse my translation. Watch quickly here. I'm going to show you the beauty of the scripture. Watch my arrow. He outlines a number of people will not inherit the kingdom. And then he says, be not deceived. He's using in paranesis here, Dr. Gain, paranesis. I already told you this, and I'm saying it again. Planaste. Do not be deceived, neither immoral, idolaters. Now watch here. Adulterers, and then he goes on, effeminates, and then those who lie with males and homosexuals. 3 sins here pertaining to sexual immorality. And Paul, I'm not going to go into the Gnostics, incipient Gnostic ideas that might be in this text, but I'm going to show you something here. Watch it here. The word for, I'm going to pause this, oidate, do not be deceived, that is paranesis, and so. The word malachi, koi, for effeminate, is translated soft, delicate, or tender. The concept here is being effeminate, voluptuous, catamite. It suggests the young partner of gay men. You know why? The soft one. So that translation, malakoi, suggests, etymologically speaking, it suggests the passive homosexual. It is noteworthy that this is set between two sexual sins. Logically, it falls in the category of immoral sexual acts. So what we are saying, the first one is general immoral sexual immorality, but the next one is the actual homosexual guy, the one who is called the stud, the male, but the malakoi is the female. So Paul is getting a little more specific here. He's talking about the female partner, homosexual partner, and he's talking about the male, okay? And so the word he's using here, arsenokoite, means sexual relation in the bed of a woman. In this compound, male is the substantive object of the verbal action implied in the sexual action. Put them together and you have my translation, a male having female sex with a man. That's how it is literally translated. Put it another way, having female sex in a male fashion. So that's how Paul wants to get it across graphically. And the last one here, I move on quickly here. You know, there's the 10 commandments in this text here. And when he gets to immoral persons, he's talking about the pornos, and he's using the same Greek word, arsenokoitai, relating to the 7th commandment in 1 Timothy 1:8-10. I'm crossing here quickly to show you this is how he's trying to apply the 10 commandments in 1 Timothy 1:8-10. When he gets to immoral person, which is the 7th commandment, he's talking about pornos, and then he uses the word for the homosexual male, the one in the homosexual relationship with the passive one. He's relating to this one here. And of course, he's talking about sexual immorality, but more specifically, he's talking about those who practice the homosexual act. Well, of course, I have Jesus and homosexuality. We'll leave that for the question. but we have more coming there when you ask the questions. Thank you. God bless you. I have the slides and the lecture. I'm willing to share all of this with you.
All right. Thank you very much, Doc. And Dr. Faz, Dr. Gain have given us two mouths full, and we we are waiting now for Dr. Brooks. Dr. Faz, Dr. Gain spoke from the perspective of the Old Testament, Dr. Faz from the perspective of the New Testament, and now Dr. Brooks, who has had extensive experience as a chaplain, counseling, spiritual counseling, and things along that trajectory, will now talk to us from that perspective. Some of the realities of LGBTQ lifestyles and so on. So we want to welcome you, Dr. Brooks. Please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Gain and Dr. Hussein, for your extensive research and lecture and your specialty, both as an Old Testament and New Testament scholar. And so I want to locate my work and explain to you how I come to this conversation. I come to this conversation as a practical theologian. That's my claim to fame. My claim to fame is I want to talk about everything Dr. Gain and Dr. Hussein said, and what does it look like in the praxis of the body of Christ.
Amen.
And so I want to just share a little bit with you all. I do not have slides, so you're just going to have to listen to me. Tell you five things that practical theology is focused and concerned about. One, the integration of faith and practice. Practical theologians want to bridge the gap between theory and practice by exploring how religious beliefs and theological concepts are lived out in everyday life, all right? Number two, practical theology is focused on the contextualization of faith. It wants us to recognize the importance of understanding the cultural, social, and historical context in which people live and practice their faith. What we are striving for is to make religious teachings relevant and meaningful within the context. Third, practical theology focuses on ministry and pastoral care. That's what I do for a living. It is very crucial in the training of religious leaders and pastors. It equips us with tools and insights needed to effectively serve congregations and community. And we address issues using counseling, worship, and ethical decision-making. Fourth, practical theology is interested in ethical reflection and action. Practical theologians think ethically, and we want to help individuals and communities to navigate complex, turn to your neighbor and say complex, somebody type it in the chat, complex moral dilemmas. Practical theology is interested in helping us navigate gray space. We encourage the development of ethical frameworks based on religious values to guide our decision-making in healthcare, business, and social justice. Fourthly, practical theology is about reflection. Practical theology uses a continuous cycle of action, reflection, and adjustment to improve the impact of religious activities. And so reflexivity and reflection are part and parcel of the work of the practical theologian. And finally, a practical theologian uses an interdisciplinary approach, drawing insights from psychology, sociology, ethics, and anthropology. And this then enriches the understanding of how theology can be practically applied to address contemporary issues. So that's the overview of the lens that I bring to the work that I do as a campus chaplain. I work in a context where we have people who come from all over the planet. So this is people who come from a variety of cultures, ethnicities, gendered identities, religion, even though we're a Christian Seventh-day Adventist campus. And we are very comfortable letting everybody know we're Christian Seventh-day Adventists, contrary to what you might hear on the streets. We're still Christian and we're still Seventh-day Adventists. Tell somebody that in the peanut gallery. Repeat it. I'm gonna repeat it again. We're still Christian and we are Seventh-day Adventists out here in Southern California. However, what we are trying to do and what my work is to support all persons who come into Loma Linda University Health for education and or treatment or employment to support their thriving as human beings. That's all I have to share because I really want us to get into the conversation. One thing I think I could say before we get into the conversation is I have a colleague, Dr. Linda Breivik. She lives in Germany currently, and she did some research, and she uses this term called, this phrase, linguistic hospitality. And she invites us whenever we get into conversations to practice linguistic hospitality. And so the first linguistic hospitality housekeeping thing I'd like to do is to ask us that when we engage in this conversation, that we remember that we're talking about people. So we're talking about persons who identify as LGBTQ+. Because the moment we only refer to them by letters and we do not actually add the word people, then it creates this idea of us versus them. When these are persons who are made by God in the image of God, who are living in a world shaped and marred by sin. Could we agree on that? Can we do that? So as we engage in conversation about this very complex topic, I'm asking us to practice this hospitality by naming and identifying that we're talking about people. We're talking about people's sons and daughters. We're talking about grandchildren. We're talking about people's parents. We're talking about aunties and uncles. So that's what I would just like to invite us to do as we continue to engage this evening on this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Thank you. If I may continue, we're going to transition now into our panel discussion, and we were scheduled to close out by 8:40. As you see, it's 8:42 and we're still here. So I think we're going to be going at least until 9 to accommodate questions from the group to the panel, as well as questions from the moderators. We have within our outline a 1-minute commercial break. Excuse me, that may be related to the administration of SAP. So I'm going to give 30 or 45 seconds to Pastor Mariah or Sister Roblin, if there is a short intro that we had planned or scheduled at this time. Otherwise, we're going to go into the second half of our program. So let me just give that pause. Okay, I've been told to go ahead. All right, great. Thank you so much. So what we'd like to do for this half of the session, of course, I've been seeing questions kind of pop up and disappear during the chat there. As I said, there were at least 2 I had to remove because they were offensive. But at this time, what we'd like you to do, if you have a question, you can share the question in chat. We won't be able to answer every question, right? Or the panelists won't, but we'll try our best to weave those questions in as we share to our group. All right, my first question, and then I'll yield to Pastor Mosley. I'm sorry, Pastor Edwards. My first question is for our panel: is homosexuality the unpardonable sin? Is there any credence that we can conclude that homosexuality is the or an unpardonable sin? I'm talking about the practice of. Anyone want to address that? The practice of homosexuality.
No, it's not the unpardonable sin, according to the Bible. It's very clear. Jesus makes it clear that the unpardonable sin is grieving the Holy Spirit, in the sense that progressively rejecting the Holy Spirit, so that the person is no longer capable of responding to God or even calling out to him. God does not ever reject anyone who calls upon him, who asks for forgiveness, and who wants to be restored. Never, ever. The unpardonable sin is making oneself so numb to what is good and what is God and what is holy in the spirit and conscience, that one is incapable of even responding to God like that. So now it's possible, of course, that a person that is living a life of homosexual sin, that could be part of the experience of leading to the unpardonable sin if they progressively reject the Spirit like that. But God is able to reach out and take people who don't know better. And like King Manasseh, I mean, look at 2 Chronicles 33. He was the baddest of the bad. He did all kinds of incredible things. And I mean, he even, I mean, murder, occult, sacrificing his children, right? Even moving the Ark of the Covenant out of the sanctuary and putting an Asherah idol in its place, which guaranteed an exile, which culminated in the Babylonian exile. He was the worst of the worst, and yet, it wasn't until he had a really bad experience and God delivered him from it, from the Assyrians, and then it says Manasseh knew that the Lord was God, so he was undeceived at that point. Satan was deceiving him. So homosexual practice is not the unpardonable sin.
Thank you, Dr. Gain. Thank you.
So I raised my hand because
please go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Dr. Hussein, I'm going to cut you off just for 1 second because I want to practice what I preach. I want to practice linguistic hospitality. I am so excited that we have talked about sex tonight. I wonder if anybody could put in the chat if they have ever heard pastors talk about sex as explicitly as we talked about sex tonight. I'm going to wait in the chat.
I was about to add a compliment to that.
And the reason I want to ask us to pause is because I really want us to be mindful of the words we use, because words create reality. So when we say things like homosexual practice, I would rather we say that as Christians, based on what we know in scripture, we have some concerns about the sexual activity. Don't say practice, because heteronormative people do not call sex practice. We just call it sex. Can I get a witness?
Okay, sorry.
Right? So I'm just asking us again, because when we use these words, what it does is it creates barriers unnecessarily. So that's number one. So let's use the words, because if we're going to get to what would Jesus do and what is Jesus asking us to do, we would have less of an uphill battle to go if we are all clear about what we mean by the words that we use. So that was number one. Then the second thing to your question, chap, Pastor Lowe, is this idea of, is it the unpardonable sin? And as someone who grew up in the Caribbean, I understand that we really want to know what's right and wrong. Like we just tell me what's right so I can do it. Tell me what's wrong so I know who's in and who's out. And if we're going to be honest, as Christians who are Seventh-day Adventists, we kind of like to know who's in, and so we can know who's out, right? That's how we're socialized. So we want to know who's in and who's out. I want to level the playing field a little, though, and I want to say that since we're willing to engage in conversations about the way persons who identify as lesbian, and I want to say the words because I do not want to assume that everyone on this call understands what those letters mean. Lesbian, L, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, A, LGBTQ, queer, or questioning, I, intersex, A, asexual plus, right? Because that's the whole idea. It's a fluid way that people are describing themselves. So if these are the ways people are showing up and we want to be persons who share the gospel with them, I think part of what we must do is practice linguistic hospitality. So I just wanted to make sure that as we keep talking to each other, we just use terms that draw people as opposed to push people away or make us feel good that we're right and they are wrong. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well received. Let me quickly make a note here. Orlando and Brenda King, I see your hand raised. We have no vocal contributions allowed from the audience. So can you please write, if you have a comment or a question, please write it in the chat. we'll do our best to recognize it. I'm going to give Pastor Edwards a chance to guide a question if you would have any following through Pastor Edwards.
Yes, and thank you very much to each of our presenters for so ably presenting the content of and after Dr. Brooks, I would want to say presenting the content of the theological understanding of LGBTQ plus. There are a few questions, and we want to take them in the order that we received them. So Janet Suttle on YouTube asked the question. And by the way, for those of you who are on the Zoom platform, we have almost 200 people viewing on YouTube as well. So if you know, you can just shout out those on YouTube. So Janet Suttle is, or Janest, I'm not sure. I'm confused. Please help me. How do one be a homosexual and be sexually pure at the same time? I think what she's asking is how is it that you can say that a person is homosexual and yet be sexually pure?
Okay. Can I share my screen?
Yes. Do you have the ability? You should have the ability to.
All right. Let's see if. All right. Do you see that now? Hope for sexual purity. Are you seeing that?
Yes, Doc.
Okay. Here's a wonderful verse here. And Dr. Hussein, I think, read this, but look at this. And it says, and this is what some of you used to be. Past tense. See verses 9 to 10.
Yes.
Homosexuals. But you were washed. You were sanctified. You were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and in the Spirit of our God.
Yes.
So the key is thorough conversion and transformation by the Holy Spirit. First, we could mention Titus 3 verses 4 to 7, which refers to the transformation by the Holy Spirit, and other verses. We could mention Jude 24, which says, he is able to keep you from falling. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do nothing without Christ, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So it, yeah, you know, there are psychologists and so on and so forth who say, I understand that it's not possible for a person who is born homosexual to do anything else, and to live a pure life, and that's true. That's true. Without the miracle of Christ and the miracle of the Holy Spirit, God is not limited by what a person is able to do in their own strength. So that's what I would say.
All right, thank you very much. And
Hello.
any
Can I
of
make
the
a
other
comment here?
panelists want to jump in? Yes. Sorry.
Can I make a comment here, sir?
Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah. To give balance to the conversation regarding the, are you there? Are you hearing me?
Yes, we
we can hear you.
Hello.
We can hear you, Doc.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay. Yes. I'm saying, honoring what Dr. Brooks earlier mentioned, we are having a discussion about homosexuality here, but to give balance to the conversation about the question of purity and homosexuality, that goes for any sin that people make, any other sexual sin, sexual immorality that people are engaged in. So if you are an adulterer and you are practicing adultery, it falls under the same category. You are impure. So it's not only homosexuality, but all other sexual sins, if causes a separation and an impurity as it relates to God. So in other words, we don't want to escalate and say only homosexuality is impure, but all sexual immoralities are impure. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So because Dr. Hussein gave us
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Hussein,
Wow.
we can hear you. Even if you're frozen, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
So,
Sorry.
No.
Right.
So
Okay.
here's where here's
We
where
must give balance to the conversation. We
we
always have these tendencies to make homosexuality as a grade higher than all other sexual immoralities.
100%.
Do you follow?
Yes. And I'm going to take it even a little further, because I believe on this call, I'm talking to my brothers and my sisters from the Caribbean Isles. We do not talk about the rates of incest, childhood sexual abuse that occurs within the church
Right.
by people who attend church, right? Because the research tells us that while it is true that clergy folk do commit sexual abuse of children, that the vast majority of offenders are actually uncles, aunties, grandparents, deacons, etc., etc. So for anyone who's going to come for me and say, why would you bring this up? It is because of what Dr. Hussein said. And when I think of Jesus, it says, he who is without sin cast the first stone. And when we have conversations about persons who are LGBTQIA, it seems we always want to know how we can exclude, push out, stone, punish, reject LGBTQIA people. Meanwhile, those of us who are terminology, heteronormative, or non-LGBTQ plus people are unable ourselves to remain sexually pure. We're not consistently.
Yes.
So please, before you send me emails or call my president, we're not doing an equivocation here. What we are saying is, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about all of it. Just want to make sure we understand where I'm coming from.
Yep.
Right.
Can I say a word here briefly?
Yes.
I wish Leviticus were not so relevant. Chapters 18 and 20 of Leviticus are not just about homosexual practice. That's only one verse in each chapter.
That's right.
There's most of it's about incest, which a lot of it which applies to what Dillis has just been talking about. And then there's also adultery. There's also bestiality.
Yes.
And bestiality is alive and well in America today. And I don't want to tell you an instance I heard about of a leader in a church, and his wife found him out in the barn. Okay, I don't want to talk about that. I was told this years ago. Bestiality is alive, and this was a Seventh-day Adventist individual, deacon or elder in the church, whatever he was. So, but I would like to pick up on one thing. Dillis, I like the idea of linguistic hospitality. As you know,
Yes.
my field is language, so I'm very interested. I try to be sensitive to language. Okay, one thing that has disturbed me is the term homosexuality. Let's talk about that term for just a moment. Homosexuality is talking about orientation. It's talking about a person who is attracted to a person of the same gender, right? But when we use homosexuality to refer to we don't make the distinction between a person, homosexuality in terms of who one is in that sense and what they do, and whether you call it practice or having sex. It's not practice like practicing the piano, okay, but it means doing it. That's what it means, doing it, having sex, okay? I feel very uncomfortable about using the term homosexuality interchangeably so that it can refer also to every case of doing the action. I think we need to make that distinction, and I think that's part of linguistic hospitality. Now, that's why I've used the term homosexual practice as opposed to homosexuality. Now, if we don't like the term practice, that's okay. We can dump that. I'm fine with that. Talk about having homosexual sex, if that's more contemporary. Let's be careful about the way we use that term homosexuality, because that's an abstract term that refers to, it's a blanket, refers to a lot of different. We want to make that
generic.
I appreciate that, Dr. Gain. This is why you are my teacher and I am not your teacher. I appreciate that clarification. And I would say, yes, I'd like us to use the term homosexual sex, because when people hear us say homosexual practice, it creates an idea that I don't know that when people are responding to persons who are LGBTQIA, when a person who is in that particular group hears us say homosexual practice, it is not an inviting term, because we have not actually done the work of saying, well, what do you mean when you say that? So I would like us to say homosexual sex then, as opposed to practice, especially if homosexuality is a term to describe a way of being. That's how I understood what you were saying.
I appreciate that a lot, because I had not understood that the term homosexual practice was coming across as offensive. So I'm learning something from you tonight, and I will.
Too.
Thank you.
Me
very
too.
much.
Yes, that's important. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. And well, if that one question took so much time, I can't imagine how long we're going to be here tonight, because we have just about 9 or 10 questions. So we're going to have to move through them with great alacrity.
I have a suggestion, Mr. Moderator. It might be nicer to respect not to call the person's names who are asking the question.
All right. Okay.
My suggestion. Yeah.
All right.
Just ask the question. Yeah.
All right. So somebody's asking, one can be LGBTQ plus in terms of orientation or identity and not sin. Question: can one be a fornicator, adulterer plus in terms of orientation or identity and not sin?
I'm sorry for laughing, because those terms are referring to what a person does, rather than just what a person is. An adulterer is not an adulterer unless they do adulterous sex, okay? And a fornicator, same thing. So this is a different linguistic category here.
Yes. The Bible seems to suggest most of the sins that are enumerated in the Bible has to do with activity, with practice. And the Bible does not really handle orientation. If someone has an orientation, or even we can go a tier higher, an attraction. I think you may know that term, Dr. Brooks. A person may have a simple attraction to a male, may not have a full orientation, which is different from an identity. Am I right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I would also add, because I've been kind of skimming through some of the questions in the chat, and I wouldn't be the kind of person I am if I didn't tell a story or two. I've been engaging this conversation for the last 36 years. I'm going to say that again. For 36 years, I've been having this conversation. When I was sitting in Jamaica, wrestling with the way that Jamaicans who identified as a Christian nation would sit and watch people who were identified as gay, beaten by community members, beaten by police, and we were silent. And we would go to church on Sabbath and on Sunday. Again, as a person who identifies as Jamaican, I remember a reggae song that talked about how do we handle people who are like this. And this is not just about whether we have seen them doing something, like the woman brought to Jesus when she was caught in the very act of adultery. Right. And then the last time I checked, adultery took 2 people. So if she was caught in the act of adultery, where was the other actor? But she was brought to be stoned. And I don't know about other Caribbean people on this call. Maybe your island nation or your state is better than mine. And maybe Jamaica isn't that way anymore. I've been gone for a long time. I just know that people who say they love God, the way that I remember them being socialized is that it was okay to physically hurt and harm people. who we would call gay.
Hmm.
And that's why this language is so important and why this conversation is so important, because the Adventist Church, based on what Dr. Gaines' presentation said, that the Adventist Church's stance is that persons who may be categorized or identified or be a part of the LGBTQ plus community are persons who are deserving of love and grace and the treatment that Jesus would treat them. That's what I think I hear the church saying. That's what we're saying. And what I hear the church saying is that where we are having, where we want to give, we want to inform practice is we want to say to persons who are LGBTQ plus, please do not engage in sexual activities. That's what I think I hear the church saying.
Mhm.
Would that be correct? Yes. The challenge for me, though, is that when people hear that, it seems in the spaces I'm in, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because we've been so taught for so long that if someone identifies as, going back to what Dr. Hussein said, is attracted to, expresses an attraction to, thinks they may be attracted to, we're like, out, you're a sinner. You don't belong. And maybe it's just in the work that I do as I'm talking to people who are raised in the church, or people who are outside of the church, and looking at the way the church is responding, and that why I'm hearing those things. Maybe it's not happening in your neck of the woods, but that's what I'm hearing here where I am.
All right. So we must move along.
Yeah,
And,
Pastor Edwards, I'm just going to say quickly,
yeah.
we are past the 9 o'clock mark. I think we're going to try to get a consensus. Do we close at 9:15 or 9:30 Eastern? Try to get a consensus here. Do we have another 7 minutes, or do we give it another 20? What's our consensus?
I'm thinking we can go up to 9:20, and I'm thinking that because of the number of questions that we have.
Okay. All right, so we're going to make
We'll try to give shorter answers, okay?
which is just 13
Right.
minutes.
Thank you, panelists, for the shorter answers. All right. Okay, so Paul said that homosexuals, amongst other sinners, shall not inherit the kingdom. He went on to say, so such were some of you. What is the gist of this text? And I think, Dr. Kane, you gave an answer, Dr. Kane. You gave an answer to this earlier.
Yes.
All right. If you want to chime in and say something else on this, then we can take that.
Okay.
But if not, I think we're safe to move along. The other question here: how accommodative should the church be of people who have homosexual tendencies, especially in occupying leadership and high offices in church or conferences?
I think the word tendency there, we need to perhaps explicate that a little more, because this, tendency, proclivity, I don't know if it's synonymous with orientation or identity. I think we need to explain what that means. And perhaps, Dr. Brooks, you may give us the distinction between these things. And I'm hoping that somebody will ask the question about gender and sex in relationship to identity. I may not get the opportunity to say this again. It is my always permanent position about this. While we do not affirm homosexual sex acts, I'm trying to avoid saying practice here now, right? I think we have to accept these people as any other sinner in the church, responding to the love of Christ. We may not affirm the behavior or the right, or even the orientation. Some may have the orientation, but we have to learn to accept, like every other sinner, a person who has an orientation to lust at women for all his life, and we still have them on the pulpit. We accept them, and we know that they are trying to be good Christians. Is the same way we relate to people who have orientation to homosexuality. And that will be my stable ground on that.
Pastor Edwards, if I can, there's a recurrent question in our chat here. People are asking in different ways. I'm going to take it from this one reference. It asks, I am wondering if the church is ready. No, sorry. That's not the one I was looking at. Bear with me, it moved. Okay. To have a homosexual orientation more likely to be genetics and an attraction to the same sex has to do cognition. The question is phrased very poorly. Which one is considered sinful? So let me see if we can construct that. To have homosexual orientation more likely to be genetics and an attraction to the same sex to be cognition. Which one is considered sinful? I believe that's what our members asking.
For one thing, how do you separate genetics from cognition? Because cognition is part of genetics. Now I think the jury is still out on the question of exactly how much of sexual orientation, gender identity is a result of genetics and biology, and how much is a result of environment. It's a very difficult and very fluid and very tricky thing. And the Bible doesn't get into it. I don't think we need to get into it. Science is shifting on this issue. The Bible is not. For the Bible, it doesn't matter what you inherit as a result. Look, I'm descended from pirates. All right. That glint in my eye.
The Vikings.
Yeah. Okay. So there's certain, and I'm part Irish. Huh? What are the Irish famous for, right? Yeah, they could have conquered the world if it weren't for Guinness. And so, there may be some tendencies in my back, and I do have tendencies, some things that I've had to struggle with in some ways, and yet the Bible Christ, the Holy Spirit, enables you to overcome those things. That's the point of the gospel.
Okay, thank you so much.
So I just go ahead, doctor. I'll come after you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, something I saw in the chat and a couple of people looking for definitions. Family, we do not have enough time to go over and define every single thing, but I would be happy to share with Chap Lowe and Pastor Edwards and others, like resources for you to engage with. Because this is, I told you, I've been doing this work for 36 years of trying to figure out how to love people in general, and definitely persons who identify as LGBTQIA+. So tonight, we're not gonna work it out tonight. Tonight is just the beginning. The fact that we're talking about it is a win.
Yes.
We do have a part 2 pending on September 8th. You'll hear more about that from Pastor Edwards later on. And Dr. Dillis, we'd love to have you back. Right? We'd love to have you back. So,
by the way, let me say this. My PowerPoint has those definitions in it.
Awesome.
Right.
I showed where they are. So I can share that with you. Okay. And then you can distribute it however you want.
Okay.
Right.
My concept, my something that is titillating my mind here now. When Jesus healed the blind man in the New Testament, Dr. Gain, he was born with a defect, isn't that so? The Bible does not explain what was the reason for the defect. And this was something physical. Could it be that some people are born with some kind of psychological defect?
Of course.
That could affect their orientation to life. And in the same way as the blind man needed healing, people who are have psychological defects or mental defects will need some kind of healing too.
Yeah, thank you. Good example.
And that's why we have the church.
Yeah.
My challenge is, pastors, is when you have who I call these cynical pessimists who say these people are like that, they cannot change. And then you have the arrogant optimist who says, you have Jesus and that has to help this situation, and only Jesus could solve this. I'm preaching here now. Jesus is the only one to solve this problem. Yes, but there are other dimensions where these people are to be helped in the scientific world, where help can be given to help overcome these defects.
Yeah. And Jesus has assigned us, the church,
Yes.
the job of embracing people, loving them, and helping them through.
Yes.
Jesus entertained at his table all kinds of sinners, and we need to be doing the same. We need to
Yes, sure.
shun them, treat them as an abomination. We need to be embracing them. And, you know, people, this is really a singles ministry when you come to think about it, isn't it? To an extent, because if we're asking these folks to live lives of purity, then this means being single. And being single, there's a lot of heterosexual single people, right? But there's a lot of loneliness that goes with that. And when a person has all these struggles, they need support, they need friendship, they need people close to them. And to have someone of the same gender who is supportive and all the rest doesn't mean that there's a sinful relationship. I mean, any more than Jonathan and David, you know, they had a supportive relationship, but it wasn't a sinful one like that.
Because I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing a couple of questions at the end, I think here's a comment I want to make. Friends, if you don't know anybody who is in the LGBT plus community, I would ask you to prayerfully ask the Lord to send someone in your life so that you can begin that journey. Because this is not as black and white as we want it to be. All our questions are, let's just know what the right answer is and let's check it off. And it is not. Some of us on this call, our children may come to us one day.
Right.
And say to us, you know, I don't feel like I am who you've been dressing me to be, or I'm having some dissonance.
True.
And the question then becomes, do you kick that person out of your house because you don't want to be ashamed? And you don't want to deal with the shame of the church community?
Right.
Or you can say to that child, I don't understand. This is going to be hard for me. And I'm not going to let you go, because that's what Jesus has been doing with me my whole life. And it would be inappropriate for me. I have a colleague, she is no longer working formally for the denomination, but she was trained in the seminary. She identifies as a bisexual person. And one of the things she says to me all the time is, Dillis, every time you're in a church, tell church families to stop kicking their kids out. That if their child comes out to them, do not kick them out, because where are you sending them? That child needs to know I can show up. That young adult needs to know there's healing and hope here. And we get to say, I don't understand it. And we get to say, I have a bias against you. We get to say, my body reacts when you tell me this thing. And it is only by God's love and grace that I'm going to learn how to love you.
Amen.
Friends, the wheat and the tares, like, we all have to grow together. We all have to learn to see people as Christ sees them.
Absolutely.
Jesus is not surprised. We're the ones that are surprised.
That's right. Well, and Paul said, bear one another's burdens. I think we need to think about, what does that mean? This belongs to all of us. This burden belongs to all of us.
Indeed, indeed.
Quickly here, Doctor, I know. Doctor, quickly, I want to I have some good news that I have two lesbian friends. One is bisexual, and over the past 2 years, I've been working with them. I take them to church. In fact, this Sunday morning, I'm taking one to get a test. She called me. The best caring people you can find, most of them are these people.
Yes, sir.
I have learned so much, Dr. Brooks, and I asked God to send these people to me. Actually, God said, I got one to come to the university. She's doing a degree now, right? They're living together. I took one to church and I gave her to drive my car. And she came to church and she said, what is your expectation of me? I said, come just as you are. She dressed like a boy. She came to church. She drove my car, held my briefcase. I am the pastor. I brought her in church. I made the appeal. She came down to the altar. She's my close friend. Do you know, Dr. Brooks? She gave me a gift that no Adventist church member has ever given to me. A nice gift. They are nice people. When you look at and what you're saying, personal experience with these people helps you to understand what they are going through, the struggles, and it shows how much you can show your love to them to bring them to Christ. So I am one of those who are working with people like that. And I have the experience, and I want to encourage you. Ministry of Healing, page 143.
Yes, sir.
In order to lead souls to Christ, this
Sir.
is what you need to do. You need to mingle with those whom you're trying to witness to. Only when you mix with them, my members, you will understand their pains, their troubles, their struggles, and so you can win them to Christ.
That is-
Amen.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. What I want to do as we get ready to close up before I pass things back over to Pastor Edwards, I'm going to give each panelist, those of you who are able to see the chat, if you see a question that you feel burdened to respond to or comment, you can go ahead and do so. Do your quick research and do so. One question we didn't get a chance to touch on, but Faz, you kind of just touched on it, and that is,
Yes.
what does Ellen White say in relation to this subject? Is she completely silent on the matter, or is there something that we can allude or deduce from her contributions? And every good Adventist wants to know what Ellen White says.
Right, right.
So is there anything that we can share in relation to such?
I did some readings about what Ellen White has to say, and Ellen White was very linguistically, what's the word again? Linguistically
Hospitality.
hospitable. She was linguistically hospitable. Ellen White does not give a category. She used euphemistic terms to even express with Sodom and Gomorrah. Even Jesus, my beloved saints, I'm getting excited here. Even Jesus, when he spoke about Sodom and Gomorrah, it wasn't within the context of homosexuality per se, but was regarding hospitality.
Correct.
Not that he doesn't condemn the practice, but I'm saying Ellen White was very sensitive linguistically to these people. Read all her writings. She's using general terms, but we know she's talking about homosexuality. Read it in Patriarchs and Prophets and some of her books that she wrote.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to close on this on my part, and that is the if I can say not the comment, but the admonition shared by Dr. Brooks when we started. As we continue in dialogue on this subject in our communities and our churches and our schools and so forth, let us please do so with a degree of love and tolerance. Let us remember that there are many, right? Not few, there are many people here with homosexual family. There are some with homosexual children.
Yes.
There are some with homosexual friends. There are some with a homosexual brother or sister that they're growing with in the same household right now. So yes, indeed. We all have our very convictions and biases and beliefs, but I think the model and the example of Christ is to be able to deal with everything while doing so constructively, to do so with love, and with great compassion. Yes, Doc.
Yeah, I'm seeing the last comment in the chat, the aggressiveness of the LGBTQ plus community to indoctrinate our children in this sinful lifestyle is wrong, and you're not talking about this. I think that is a huge problem. Our young people are getting this coming at them from all over the place. The media, at least here in the United States, through magazines, through TV, through any kind of media, that gives the moral high road is to support those who want to do homosexual sex. Okay. That's the moral high road. Okay. And anyone who opposes that is a bad person. And it's affecting our young people. It really is. And this is a big issue for us, because our young people are looking at us and they're saying, are you going to be acting like Christ? And what they're thinking of is being compassionate and kind. They're not thinking about upholding God's principles. They're thinking about being compassionate and kind. So we're going to have to teach them the principles, but we also must balance that with the compassion and the kindness. Otherwise, they will march out or run out of the church. And I think a lot of them are doing that. So we've got to be very, very careful. And we have to help our children from the youngest age possible to help them to know how to deal with these things, because these things are coming at them from younger and younger and younger. It reminds me of it reminds me of somebody told me years ago, there were two little boys, and a little boy came up to his older brother and he said, well, no, the older brother said to the little boy, I found a condom on the veranda. And the little boy says, what's a veranda? You know, I mean, kids are learning stuff so young. We have to really work with our young people because the devil is coming at them in a major way.
All right, I think
That's Edwards.
we must close here, panelists, and
I didn't get to say
I
my
can-
last piece.
yes, sorry.
So the one thing that I saw in the chat that I wanted to use to end my remarks are these. Words matter. When you see the word affirm, so many people think we're saying when a person who identifies as LGBTQIA asks you to affirm them, I think they're saying that they're asking us to affirm homosexual sex. That's actually not what they're asking.
No.
What they're asking you to do is to see me as a person.
Yes, and not a category.
Do you see me as a person and not a category?
Yes.
So for everyone on this call,
Mhm.
I always ask the question, who are the theys that are harming our people when we have the responsibility of parenting and loving them? We have a responsibility to send them into the world to share the good news. So it doesn't matter what they are trying to teach our children.
Right.
It doesn't matter what they are saying. What matters is, what are we saying and what
Yes.
are we doing?
Hmm.
That's what matters, because we have met the Middle Eastern rabbi named Yeshua. We say we have met him, and we say we are following him. And if he was here today, he would be hanging out with LGBTQIA plus people. He'd be lounging at the table with them. He'd be eating with them. And we would be saying he couldn't be the Son of God, because if he knew who those people were, he wouldn't associate with them. That's what he would be saying. I may not be a Hebrew Bible scholar, but I know my Hebrew Bible. And what the Hebrew Bible tells me is that God came, God's self, to reveal to humanity what God's plan is. And that is to sacrificially die so that everyone could come. And if we are spending all our time trying to figure out what's right and wrong, it's important. If we're trying to figure out who gets to come in and who gets to stay out, it's important. Then we're going to miss what the gospel is about. The wheat, the tares, let's all just grow together. Let's sharpen one another so that when Christ comes and asks us, what did you do with what I gave you? We can say, here they are. Thank you.
Yeah, Mary Magdalene is making it into the kingdom, but
Yes,
the
sir.
self-righteous, religiously arrogant people are not. Jesus made that very clear.
The difference is repentance, right, Doc?
Yes, yes.
Yes. What I can take away from the discussion tonight, and I'm not attempting to give a summary, but some of the talking points that emerged. I'm seeing that we have been mixing people and the movement. The principle of how we treat people is standardized throughout the entire Bible and along the trajectory of Christian history, regardless of who those people are. The problem that I think we face today, though, is that some of the ammunition that we are aiming at people should be directed towards this movement. And there are people who are struggling to overcome. There are people who are attempting to discover things about themselves as they are managing these emotional realities. And God will lead us to those people. The challenge, I think, that we can give some focus to is the fact that, like Sodom, the movement is beginning to attempt to institutionalize behaviors that are contrary to God, and that movement should receive our ammunition that we are directing to people. What we direct to people is love, compassion, acceptance, and we offer them the resources of heaven and the church to live transformative life as we do to every other category of sinner. But the movement, the LGBT QIA movement, that organization that is attempting to replace all things that are gods, that we must speak out against.
Well, I think we need to take away from them the ammunition of saying that you Christians are not loving. We need to take that argument away by being loving, by protecting the rights of people as human beings more than anyone else, being willing to stand up for it and even suffer for it, march for it, whatever. And then that'll take that argument away. And so that's a very crucial thing, so that we can raise the banner of Christ in the world, and people can see that this is really making a difference, rather than just turning people away.
Thank you, Doc. And we have received several questions which we were not able to answer tonight. But as Pastor Lowe was saying, we have a part 2. It's coming up on the 8th of September. If you are wise, you will log in early, because you might not get a seat at the table. You might have to, go to the YouTube. But it's on the 8th of September. You will get more information. The flyers will come out. I know personally that individuals have already confirmed their presence, and it's going to be interesting. What I will attempt to do is, Pastor Moria, is you take the questions that have come in tonight, those that remain unanswered, and try to at least factor them into the discussion on the 8th, so that these questions can receive answers in part 2 of this discussion.
Absolutely.
Right? So thank you guys very much for joining. We know that for some of you it's way past the bedtime, but we thank you so much for joining. Pastor Lowe, if there's anything from you, and then we hand over to Sister Roblin, who will do the vote of thanks.
Yes, and you may go right ahead, and I'm sure she'll probably say a little more about the upcoming presentation on the 8th. If not, I'll follow up after her. But Sister Roblin, you have the floor. Let me try to find our dear sister. She may need to be mic'd. Sister Roblin. Okay, here we go.
Yes, good. Thank you. I'm so glad that I'm a part of the family of God. When one has an heartache, we all share in that pain, and then we rejoice in the victory. It is indeed a pleasure, and we're happy to have this conversation this evening. And permit me to address you panelists as brothers and sisters. We are happy that you came by here to engage us in this very informative and philosophical and spiritual aspect of this topic. Dr. Faz, I have never known those things that you spoke about, and I was happy that you did share them with us, that homosexuality actually went back so far, and we're just happy for the information shared and the discussion that we've had. To our moderators, Pastors Edwards and Lowe, we salute you as well for taking so good charge of this program, because with all the tons of questions, you were able to zero in them nicely, and we are thankful for what you have done in the program, organizing the program this evening. And to our active and passive participants, we are thankful for your presence here, and we are hoping to see you back here for part 2 of this discussion. And while you do that, we would like to encourage you to be a blessing to humanity. Thank you once again. Have a happy Sabbath, everyone.
All right, thank you, Sister Roblin. Let me extend thanks to the executive body of SAP, the president of SAP, Pastor Clinton Mariah, who's camera shy or technically unable, maybe, but certainly extending his thanks and gratitude to all of you. And those of you who have seen something tonight and you feel I'd like to be a part of it, or there's something I can contribute, remember our objective is to educate the Adventist body, both present, Guyana and the Caribbean, but as well as the diaspora in the US, Canada, Europe, all over the world, to bring us to a better understanding and enlightenment of many of these things that we're facing today. So we want to thank you. And if you want to be a part of SAP, you can leave your information in the chat, your contact information, that is. And Sister Robin, that you just heard, will take note to pass you information on membership and being a continuing part. Again, thank you to all the panelists, and especially, I apologize, I ran over a bunch of people tonight also in my haste and eagerness. My apologies to you, but truly blessed by all your contributions. Hope to see you again. Please have a wonderful afternoon and evening. God bless you all.